Hello beautiful, my name is Mina. Welcome to my channel Mina Reads, and today we are going to be talking about the fact that I read 147 books in 2022, and we are going to go over my Storygraph stats for all of those reads, and we're just going to analyze the reading year, see how it went for me. So I do have the stats on my phone via the Storygraph app. Storygraph is a really cool app. This is not sponsored, by the way, but I do really like Storygraph as an alternative to Goodreads if you are looking for one. So with 147 books read, I ended up reading 38,846 pages, which sounds like a lot. I don't know what is like an average amount of pages to read in a year, but it sounds like a lot of pages to me. So yay me, very excited about that. I think one of the most interesting stats that Storygraph shows you is like the moods stat. That I read the most from was apparently emotional, which I find interesting. The next one was adventurous, then lighthearted, then dark. We got some funny, some reflective, much less mystery, much less tense ones, only a little bit of hopeful, a little bit of challenging, a little bit of sad, very few informative, inspiring, or relaxing reads. So interesting stat. Like I don't necessarily feel like I read a lot of emotional books last year, but apparently so. Let's click on the stat and let's see what they consider to be emotional. Alright, so the first thing they're showing me, Open Hearts. Open Hearts is a romance that I really loved, and I did cry over it, so valid. The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, I don't agree. Redefining Realness by Janet Mock, that was emotional, I could see it. The Devil's Submission is smut, like it's historical erotica. How is that emotional? Malibu Rising, okay, I kind of see it. Losers by Harley LaRoe, okay. There's some monster smut on here. Some serial killer smut. It's just like a lot of stuff on here that I don't think I would say is emotional, but you know, I don't make the rules, so it's okay. All right, so for pacing, I read 9% of my reads were slow paced, 33% were fast paced, and 58% were medium paced. So majority of my reads were medium paced. I think that that sounds about right because I am not a slow paced girly. I am very impatient, so I need the book to be medium paced or fast paced. I need us to get where we're going quick and in a hurry so that I can be invested. If it takes too long for me to get into a story, I'm not going to be invested and I'm going to be bored. So yeah, that makes sense. It adds up. It really does. As far as page numbers go, 3% of my reads were 500 pages plus, 38% were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 59% of my reads were under 300 pages, which makes so much sense. I read a lot of short books, a lot of novellas. I read a lot of romances, like independently published romances that tend to be maybe like 250 pages on average. So yeah, makes a lot of sense, and I plan to keep it that way. I like reading shorter books, I have to be honest. Like long books are not necessarily my thing, but it is a goal of mine in 2023 to read some more long books because I have a lot of fantasy on my TBR that is over 500 pages, and I would like to knock a few of them off my reading list. So I will be hopefully getting around to reading some of those books soon, but yeah, usually long books are not my thing. As for genre, fiction or nonfiction, so I read 6% nonfiction and I read 94% fiction. Of course, this makes a lot of sense. I believe I read 8 nonfiction books in 2022, most of them memoirs. A few were like just informative reads, but I would definitely like to read a lot more nonfiction in 2023. Near the end of the video, I will give you some more concrete reading goals of mine, but 2023, I would like to read some more nonfiction because in 2022, I read these 2 nonfiction books which were really transformative for me, and I thought that they were just such great reads. I feel like they're kind of going to revolutionize my reading life a little bit. So one of them is The Sellout by Dan Ozzie, and this is a nonfiction book which is about this particular time period in music in the 90s and the early 2000s during the explosion of like pop punk and emo, like hardcore in the mainstream media, and how a lot of these bands got their start, their first like major label debut, and how it went for them. I thought it was such an interesting read because one, I really love music in general, really love rock music. I'm obsessed with like the emo bands, the whole emo music period was so integral to my childhood, my adolescence, and so I love that music still to this day as a grown woman. And it was just so interesting to me to see like a different side of the music and of the music industry and what the beginnings of those bands were like. And so this book, reading it, made me realize that like obviously this is a very silly realization to just be coming to, but it made me realize that reading nonfiction could be fun and could be entertaining and interesting if you find nonfiction books that are about topics that truly interest you. So like rock music is a passion of mine. Music in general is really interesting to me, and also I'm kind of a nosy bitch and I want to know more information about bands that I really love. So I feel like this book was the perfect confluence of all those things, and it made it such an engaging nonfiction read. And I had no idea that nonfiction could be that engaging and kind of exciting to read. And the other nonfiction book that was really amazing was Being Human by Judith Heumann, and this is about Judith Heumann, who is a disability rights activist, and I had never heard of her before until I took this class where we read the memoirs of various activists, and it was just a really incredible reading experience for me because I realized that there's so much that I have no idea about regarding the disabled community and like the disability rights movement like from the 60s, 70s, and I just knew nothing about it. And so it was really interesting to read from this woman who was very integral to the disability rights movement and to making sure that disabled people have certain rights and protections under the law. And I just thought that it was so interesting, and so it's an amazing memoir. I would highly recommend it. It's very well written, and it's pretty short as well. I think it's under 300 pages, but it was so good. It was so emotionally compelling, so informative, and it made me realize that I just really like reading memoirs, so I would like to read a lot more memoirs in 2023 if I can, because it was just so good. I would highly recommend it. It's just so great for expanding your worldview and, you know, learning from the perspectives and experiences of people outside of yourself. I think that that's something that I like to think that I do pretty often, but clearly there's so much that I don't know about the world, about the country that I live in, and about, you know, the people and the communities around me. So I found that to be like a really interesting reading experience, very transformative for me. So again, I would like to read a lot more nonfiction in the coming year. So as far as genres go, by genre, by far, my most read was romance. I love romance, always will read romance, and I think that romance will probably always be the highest reading stat that I have because I just love reading romance. I like reading them. I think they're so fun and entertaining, and I read a lot of like short romance books, a lot of romance novellas, read lots of spice, lots of smut, and some like more traditionally published, you know, longer romances and stuff. So romance is just always going to be that girl, always going to be ahead of the pack by quite a lot. But my second largest stat for genre is LGBTQIA, which is interesting. Glad to know that I read a lot of queer lit in 2022. I try to read a lot of queer lit all the time, but you know, always good to know. So lots of queer lit. Then this third highest, why am I holding up two fingers? The third highest genre was fantasy, and following that is contemporary and then manga. I did read a lot of manga in 2022. I believe in 2021 is when I really discovered that I like reading manga, and so 2022 I just kind of stepped that up a little bit and read a lot. I read lots of Spy Family. I read this new manga series that I'm in love with called Fangs. I read another one called A Sign of Affection. I read this vampire horror manga called Happiness. Yeah, I read lots of manga. I read Blue Flag, so made some progress. I would definitely like to be reading more manga in 2023 as well, because there are a few series that I like to finish up, like Spy Family and things like that. So manga, yeah, love manga, so great. After that we have like erotica, historicals, etc, etc. You can see the graphs. It'll be up there on the screen. So those ones are very like minor genres that I was picking up from, but definitely lots of fantasy, lots of romance, a good amount of contemporary, and manga. Okay, so the next stat I want to tell you about is my most read authors of 2022. So my most read author was, well, it's a tie between Shay Sanders and Sue Morishita. Sue Morishita is the mangaka of A Sign of Affection. Really great romance manga series about these college students, and this girl, she is deaf and she is teaching sign language to her love interest, and they're a very cute couple. I love them so much. So I read 6 volumes of that. I read 6 books by Shay Sanders. I think my favorite one that I read by her was The Replacements. Very good, very sexy psychopath employee romance. I had a good time. Then I read 5 books by Harley LeBrow. Love Harley LeBrow. Read a lot of novellas by her. And I read The Loser's Duology. Very good, very sexy, very dark and steamy. Had a good time. Then T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher has introduced me to the latest love of my life, which is cozy fantasy. So shout out to T. Kingfisher for being that girl. I think I will be continuing on with my T. Kingfisher spree in 2023. Then we've got Katrina Jackson, Christina C. Jones, Catherine Moon, Akwaeke Emezi, Ryan K. Vaughn, author of Saga. Absolutely adored Saga this year. I definitely want to read more in 2023. And then we have Tatsu Indu.
Hello, I'm editing this and I have no idea why I said Indu. It's definitely Tatsuya Endo.
And that person is the mangaka of Spy Family. So it appears that the month where I read the most books was March. And it seems like in the beginning of the year, looking at this, like in the beginning of the year, was reading quite a lot. I was very motivated. I think the graph is pretty interesting. It's kind of like I'll have a good reading month and then I won't read anything. Good reading month, then I won't read anything. Good reading month, and then I won't read anything. So very up and down graph. Definitely slowed down in my reading around the summertime, and it just never really picked back up, but I still made lots of progress. Still ended up reading 147 books. Very proud of myself. But I do like looking at the graph. It is pretty interesting. I wonder what was going on with me in those months where I was reading like 18, 17, 16 books a month. Like, where did that motivation go near the end of the year? Who knows? And the final stat that I am going to share with you is my star ratings. So I don't star rate every single book that I read, but I have star rated the majority of them. So out of 147 books, I gave a star rating to 135, and of those 135, my average star rating was a 3.34. This is not absolutely fantastic, and I would say that this is definitely a reflection of my reading year, which I felt like was very middle of the road. I did not feel that it was the best reading year. I don't feel like there were a lot of standout reads, but I do think that's partially my fault. In 2022, I took to this sort of strange reading habit of just picking up like random things, some random things that I knew I wasn't going to like, or that I knew weren't going to be like 5 stars, and I just would pick them up just to kind of fill the time. And not to say that that's a bad thing, because reading is a hobby. It's meant to fill some time, to be a leisure activity, you know what I'm saying? And not every read is going to be a 5-star and a new favorite. But I definitely think that I was less intentional in my reading in 2022. So I would like to be a little bit more intentional about the books that I'm picking up. And maybe that will lead to like greater reading satisfaction in 2023, but we're gonna have to see. Alright, so those are all the stats, and I'm going to very quickly share with you some of my more concrete reading goals for 2023. So the first goal is going to be that I want to read 122 books. Now, that is definitely lower than what I read last year, but I want to set my goal a little bit lower because I would like to, as I mentioned earlier, I would like to read some more long books. I would like to read some more books that are over 500 pages to tackle my fantasy TBR. I want to read some other, maybe slightly more challenging books, maybe reading a little bit less romance than I did last year. Who knows? I mean, don't really quote me on that, but it is a goal of mine to kind of prioritize some other reads and some of the other genres that are still on my TBR. So it's possible that I will read those books less quickly. And so to account for that, I want to read 120 books rather than like making my goal higher, you know? So that's the thought process. Then I want to read 30,000 pages. Last year I read 38,000, so I do think it's possible. I don't think it'll be too much of a stretch or too difficult, so we'll see how that one goes. I want to read 15 nonfiction books. Like I said, had a very transformative reading year in regards to nonfiction. I read about 8 of them. 2 of them really stood out, but most of them were really good, and so I definitely want to read a lot more. My next reading goal is that I want to kind of be what I've called the backlist bandit. What I mean by that is that I want to pick a few authors that I have enjoyed, and I would just want to pick up like everything from their backlist. So the first author that I have kind of on this tentative list is Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I would like to read all of her backlist. I think I only have about 3 or 4 more books of hers that I have yet to read, so it's not going to be too many. And we're going to see like what other authors I might choose to do that with. Like T. Kingfisher is kind of an option. I don't know. I think it's fun. I think it's a fun way to read. I think that's the way that I used to approach reading before I started my YouTube channel. Is I would find an author, and if I liked them, I would read like everything that they had put out. And so I want to get back into that. I think that that was like a very fun method of finding new books to read, rather than constantly looking for new authors, new titles, new, you know? Just focusing in on stuff that I already know kind of brings me joy or appeals to me in some specific way. Alright, my next goal is that I would like to try some more new to me Black romance authors, particularly because I do have a few romance authors that I pick up books from them all the time, and I just have a very consistent rotation, but I haven't introduced any new Black romance authors into my rotation recently, so I would like to try a couple new ones this year and see how I feel. So maybe I'll do like a new to me Black romance author reading vlog or something like that. Who knows? Don't quote me, but maybe, because it is a goal of mine, and I do always want to kind of spotlight independently published Black romance authors when I can. So I definitely need to cast a wider net when I'm picking up my Black romance reads for the next year. I already sort of mentioned that I want to work on my fantasy TBR, so I do want to read some more adult fantasy this year. I don't think I read very many like epic fantasy books. I definitely read a lot of fantasy, a lot of kind of whimsical books, a lot of fantasy romances, but not a lot of like epic fantasy, hard sci-fi kind of stuff. So I would like to introduce a little bit more of that to my reading life, so we're gonna see how that goes. And my final goal is that I want to get a handle on my physical book collection, and by that I have like several categories of things that I want to do. I want to count all of my books that I physically own. I want to know how many I own, and kind of categorize them. Maybe I'll make like a list or a spreadsheet or something like that, just because I want to know what I have on my shelves, and I want to be able to easily reference them, and like just to know how many are there. I'm kind of curious about the number. And then I also want to organize my book collection, because my book collection is very unorganized, very haphazard, very all over the house in, you know, piles like this one behind me. So I would like to introduce some kind of organization system to my book collection, and I will also like to try and separate my unread books from read books, just to make it like easier when I'm looking at my book collection to figure out what I should be picking up next, or if I want to reread something, I'll know where it all is, because I feel like, as I said, my book collection is just very haphazard, very all over the place, and there is no organization or coherence to it. So I'd like to introduce some in 2023. I also want to make a video of my entire physical TBR, which I think will be a huge undertaking, but it is a video that I have been wanting to make for like several years, and I've never gotten around to it. So it's a big goal of mine to make that video, and maybe make like a bookshelf organization video. We'll see. And then I also want to make some progress on my 23 in 2023. So if you haven't watched that video, I'll leave it linked below or in the cards. And essentially that video is just some books that I already own that are on my physical TBR. Some of them have been on my TBR for a long time. Some of them are new books that I had recently hauled. And they're just 23 books that I kind of want to prioritize reading in 2023. And I have a little TBR jar. I'll be selecting 2 books from the jar each month, and reading them and making some progress that way. So that's another way that I'm trying to make some progress and get a handle on my physical book collection. So yeah, those are all of my reading goals for the upcoming year. Those were all my reading stats for last year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was kind of interesting to you. I just really wanted to film it. So thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next one. So bye, you guys.